Hi there, senior strategists. Welcome to Module 2, Strategic Leadership. So when we talk about leadership, there's an old saying that we use, and it's so goes the leader, so goes the group. So goes the leader, so goes the group. And so if you take a look at this photograph, this spectacular photograph really speaks to that, where you have the leader who is taking the primary position, and the rest of the associates within the organization's responsibility is to follow the way. And oftentimes when we think about strategy, sometimes it's a relatively small strategy. It's not going to take huge amount of effort, but you still have to execute. And sometimes it's going to be climbing a big mountain. But the bottom line is the leader needs to show the rest of the organization where to go. So one of the first questions I often get is, how do you become a strategic leader, or what's the process that you might take? And what most research will show is that there are some innate abilities that every single one of us has. I mean, you could be an introvert and still be a great leader. You could be an extrovert and still be a great leader. It's about how you navigate your own personality given the situations that are being thrown at you from the external and internal environment. So we're born with innate abilities. But what happens is, during our upbringing, those abilities can be shifted, they can be shaped, they can be reinforced, or or the opposite, they can be extinguished in terms of what we have. So our upbringing certainly has an implication, as well as ultimately our age, our education, and the personal experiences that we encounter along the way. And so when we think about what we're born with, and then the experiences that we have, are all really important. So for any of you who are in a leadership position now at VCU, or if you're working full-time, are you a project manager or department manager or a team lead? All of those represent your experiences that then you can build upon. The big issue is that if we make mistakes, and we all make our mistakes, we don't want to replicate those mistakes, or we want to reduce the likelihood that they will occur again. We each come into a situation and interpret it given our conduct, our context. And so all three of those things play an important role in how we become a leader. When we think about strategic leadership, guys, though, one of the most important focus areas for us is to have a growth mindset when we come to work every day. Because every organization is a living, breathing organism of sorts. And so what do we bring to that situation is an important consideration. If we bring a fixed mindset, which is one of a negative focus, my potential is only predetermined. I'm frustrated, I give up. I just stick to what I know. You operate with a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, which is about challenges help me to grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. So you encounter school the same way. Every day we wake up and we're either in a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And a lot of it has to do with the conversations that we have going inside of our head. Is the conversation around you growing? Is it dominating your thinking, or is the fact of you sticking with the status quo and hunkering down, is that a focus of your conversation in your head? And the reality is, it's difficult to be in a growth mindset every single day of the year. So we do fall into this fixed mindset standpoint, but we can't keep ourselves in that. We can't live within a fixed mindset. If you want to be a strategic leader, if you want to be a strategic leader, you got to bring the juice every single day when you come to your organization. once again, here's what we're dealing with, these paradigms that we all have. We wake up, we go to work, we come home, we go to bed, and the older you get, the more fixed those paradigms become. And so we got to figure out how we're going to bust through those paradigms as we age. And for me, it's just an everyday reality that I cannot get complacent. And I am very focused on not doing so. If I become complacent, if I become irrelevant, then I don't deserve to be your professor. At least that's the way I look at it. And so I've got to be able to bust out of these paradigms, and teaching the online stuff and doing a lot of other things is one of those ways. So what are your paradigms? Ask yourself, what are you operating with a fixed mindset right now? And how do you bust loose? How do you break it up to convert to a growth mindset? And strategic leaders need to do that all the time. Now, when you are a strategic leader, you can approach situations in three ways. One, you can approach a situation and say, you know what, I want to shape the future of the industry in which I choose to compete. So in that regard, you're going to play a role in establishing how businesses globally should perform in terms of innovation, standards, and outcomes. Think about it for a second right now. What brands are operating with a shape the future mentality? This is big. Not many choose to operate this way, but of course, Tesla is probably the best example right now. Amazon, certainly when they first came out, operated in this way. Apple Computer is interesting because it's very rarely is it a first mover, but what it's amazing at is taking a look at what the first movers do, and then perfecting upon it. So I could say Apple certainly over the years has played a shape the future role in the industry in which they operate. But you look at every single industry, and you look at what they're doing. There's a little brand here in town. It's called Holiday Barn Pet Resort. And Holiday Barn is obviously, it's a dog kennel. They have grooming, they have doggy daycare, and training, and they really play a leadership role, not only regionally but nationally, in terms of pets and their families, and the role of pets in society overall. So that's shape the future. Adapt to the future is where most organizations operate. So you have these forces coming in that we'll talk a lot more about when we get to our module 3. And how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to deal with them through fast, speedy service? Are you going to focus on quality, agility, and execution, and recognizing and capturing opportunities when they arise? So what's going on right now is in, for those supply chain majors in the house, you know it. I mean, speed is just a huge issue in our supply chains across many different industries. Supply chains are backed up, so we're not able to quickly respond to the demands of our customers, and organizations are trying to figure out that right now. I would say overall, supply chain issues are, certainly in the top 3 issues that most industries are dealing with right now. And then they're reserving the right to play. And this is when there's so much uncertainty that strategic leaders are worried about investing too early. So they invest sufficiently just to stay in the game, but they avoid any premature big bets in that regard. Now, I would also say that sometimes, even in certain times, you got some strategic leaders that operate too conservatively. They're in their fixed mindset. And as a result, they retain the status quo and they don't move into new areas of innovation like they should. So if we were to look at a job description for the strategic leader, these 5 bullet points are going to really say it all. 1, that strategic leader is going to help facilitate the strategic direction of the organization. And the facilitation is about rallying the the organization and leveraging them, seeking their input, doing your best at collaboration to drive growth. Two, every organization, I don't care how small you are, you're going to have a portfolio of resources and businesses that you got to navigate. So if you think about the different businesses that you have, which are the most profitable, which are the least profitable. If you walk into a supermarket, you see thousands and thousands of products on the shelf, and those products are all categorized into different departments. And so traditionally in the supermarket industry, the grocery department are all the dry goods that you see in the center of the store. So those might be like Pampers and Bounty and Cheerios and salad dressing and dog food and all those sorts of things. And that one big category that has thousands of items tends to generate the lowest margin. Usually in supermarkets, the deli department is going to generate the highest margin. And then that's going to be followed by the produce department or the meat department or the seafood department. But it's that center store, it's that grocery area that tends to be a big challenge for supermarkets to navigate, and figuring out which of those products is selling and which are not. I mean, if you're a Walmart and you've got a product on the shelf and it's just not moving, there's no velocity, then Walmart's going to take that product out and it's going to put other products in that are going to be able to generate revenue for them. So you got to navigate all that. Then you have that culture, to sustain an ethical, high-performing culture, which is so important, establishing core competencies, capabilities, and infrastructure to execute the strategic plan. What do I mean by that? Think about Walmart moving into the dairy business. They built the nation's largest dairy plant. They didn't know what they were doing in that regard. They sell groceries online. They sell groceries in brick and mortar stores. So they had to learn to become a manufacturer, particularly manufacturer of milk. And because milk is, obviously from cows, there's a cold chain component to it. So milk has got to be maintained in a cold chain. I mean, if you buy milk, a gallon of milk in a supermarket, and then you put it in the backseat of your car and it's in July, for every hour that milk is outside of refrigeration, you are just cutting down the amount of days that it's going to be good and not sour on you. Businesses are like that. They've got to build the infrastructure. They got to make sure products are kept within the cold chain to make sure that we're happy when we go buy them. And then last, you got to have these KPIs, key performance indicators. You got to know how to focus on measurement and control. And we'll talk later in the semester about the notion of measurement is about lead measures and lag measures. Lag measures are financial measures of sorts, revenue, margin, net operating income, et cetera. And then lead measures typically are measuring things that lead to lag measures. So lead measures will be activities typically or behaviors. So if you go into Chick-fil-A and you say thank you and they say my pleasure, and then you measure, if Chick-fil-A were to measure how often do their associates say my pleasure, and they measure that through mystery shopping or other indicators, and they're doing it 95% of the time, I'm sure they want to do it 100% of the time, but if they do 90%, at least they know what their performance is. So that's strategic leadership. And if you look at the definition, the anticipation piece is around looking outside, looking inside the organization to figure out what's just around the corner that we've got to be able to deal with. What's just around the corner? That's the anticipation. That's about intuition. That's about using research. That's about listening. That's about doing surveys. You're trying to grasp which you're going to be dealing with over the next several months or actually next several years. And so the anticipation is, for the strategic leader, one of the most important components that you can deal with. Now, a hurricane comes in, This is, the anniversary of 9/11, 20 years is coming in. I've been watching a number of documentaries about that. Perhaps the military had some indication that something was brewing. But if I think about the average person in America, when they woke up that morning, did they have any idea that something was going to happen? The answer is no. But strategic leaders, their job is to try to anticipate as best as they can, what are these driving forces? What are these inflection points that are coming in? And we'll talk more about that again in module 3. Then you envision. So the envision is the crafting of the strategy, the direction. We're going to go now to China to sell our goods or our services. We are now going to vertically integrate, and we're going to become a dairy. We are now going to go out, if I'm Amazon, and buy Whole Foods, right? And so the chip shortage, the semiconductor chip shortage, is really going to be interesting to see how organizations are reacting to that. So if we back up, did they have any indication that there was going to be a shortage? Like Apple may have, I'm not sure, but Apple had started to vertically integrate and was going to become, at least in part, a developer of their own chips. So the anticipation, the vision, and then because as a strategic leader, your job is to facilitate, you can't do everything. And you can't be a micromanager every single day. So you have to empower others. You have to empower your workforce to create strategic change. And you have to build the capacity to do whatever you decide to do in the strategy. And that's the execution piece. Just because you build the strategy, guys, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to execute. As a matter of fact, the research will show for every 10 strategies created by organizations across America, only 6 see the light of day. 4 strategies never occur. And that is because they hadn't thought through the strategy well enough. There weren't enough people to execute on the strategy. You took your eye off the ball. You weren't able to navigate and orchestrate all the change that was needed. So this slide right here, and this is Roz Brewer, of course, from Walgreens, who just took over Walgreens in the middle of the pandemic. She came from Starbucks. She was the COO at Starbucks. And just think about what she'd encountered at Walgreens in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, they're trying to figure it out in terms of, okay, when are we going to get the vaccines? What's our role going to be in the vaccines? And she and her team are doing this right now with the booster shots coming out. How are they going to navigate that? We know Moderna is going to be pushed back a little bit, but we know Pfizer will be available September 20th, and it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. So if we take a step back and we look at strategy, the process across all levels. First of all, when we think about corporate strategy, it's where to compete. That's about where industry-wise, what markets in terms of products or services, and then what geography. Are we going to stay regionally? Are we going to move nationally? Or are we going to become a global brand? Five Guys started up in Maryland. They started very slowly, and they're spanning across the United States. But of course, now they're operating in Europe as well. So Five Guys has made the decision to be a global brand, not growing too crazily, but still they've decided to do that. Now, they are burgers and fries. Yes, they have grilled cheese. But Five Guys is going to have to determine, are they going to add another protein, just like Chick-fil-A is going to have to make that decision. McDonald's, of course, has a chicken sandwich, right? But Chick-fil-A does not have a burger. And so Five Guys may be experimenting somewhere with a chicken sandwich. I am not sure, but I don't think so. But they're going to have to make that decision. And that's a strategic decision. When we think about how to compete, all right, how are you going to go to market? Are you going to be cheap, which is cost leadership? Talk a lot more about that coming up in the next several chapters. Are we going to be differentiated? Or this concept of what we call value innovation. Value innovation is best value, and that's where you get a high quality or a stylish product or services at a very, very reasonable cost. So Five Guys is a differentiated brand, and we call it focus differentiated, because their meat is much, or their ingredients, I should say, just not their protein, their meat. They're going to be all high quality products, particularly potatoes. When you listen to the podcast from the founder of Five Guys, you'll hear about his and his family's orientation to differentiation. So they are highly differentiated product and service company. And then the functional strategy is, how to implement a chosen business strategy. Is it going to be leveraging information services? Are we going to need real estate involved? What's our supply chain issues? If you think about potatoes, again, for Five Guys, that's supply chain. So whoever the team in supply chain, are or is, they're out there buying and procuring the potatoes. They've got a very, very dedicated team to that. In their estimation, the French fries are a huge part of what they do, in addition to the burger. So these three things are about process. When we think about strategic leaders, so goes the leader, so goes the group. Every breath they take, every move they make, they're watching them. And I know that song was from the Police years ago. It's really about a stalker, but it fits the role of a leader. You wake up every day, you come to work, and everything coming out of your mouth, and the body language, everything, people are going to react to it. So here is a list of leaders that have had a positive impact on performance. Certainly not perfect. Certainly not perfect. Elon Musk has had his little shares of situations that he's had to deal with, as well as Jeff Bezos, etc. So leaders can absolutely have a positive and negative impact. Satya Nadella, who has come into Microsoft, for example. Microsoft was almost in a state of I would say a fixed mindset. They bought Skype years and years ago, did nothing with it, and now they've got Teams, but Teams is still not perfect. If I compare Teams to Zoom, in my humble opinion, Zoom is so much better than Teams. When I work with clients and we use the Microsoft Teams, there's always something that we're dealing with, just like there was when we had Skype. So this is Jim Collins right here. And you've probably heard the book about the books Built to Last and Good to Great. He was the author, and he's looked at over 1,000 companies, and what he found when we think about great companies. So great companies are led by great strategic leaders. There's a sustained competitive advantage. So what is it about Five Guys that enables them to build what Warren Buffett likes to call a moat, around the business, and the business is their capital. They have great stock returns, almost 7 times the general market, consistent patterns of leadership, and summarized in the level 5 leadership pyramid that I'll talk about in a second. So I want to speak just about the role of the strategic leader in bringing their own philosophy and bringing their own set of values to the table. And this is Yvon Chouinard, the founder, chairman of Patagonia. And so there's a theory called upper echelon theory. And upper echelon theory is where your senior leaders of an organization will have a philosophy, and then they will cascade that philosophy down to the organization, all the way down to the first level of employee. Now, Patagonia is operating in a very socially responsible way. It's a premium brand, so it ain't going to be cheap. But its business is to save the home planet. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to have a positive effect on our home planet, planet Earth. Very high focused, growth oriented vision um, and mission. And so the brand promises are to build the best product, which is all about quality and durability, cause no unnecessary harm to the environment. So they're going to look at their supply chain. So the supply chain of Patagonia is an incredibly important component of them living their brand and then inspiring others to do the same. And so when we think about Patagonia, then we can't think about them without thinking about the environment, and that's on purpose. And so when you think then about Patagonia, you think about one, that it's a socially responsible company, but two, at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay to be a customer. You're going to have to pay a lot of money to be a customer of Patagonia. Now, in that video, if you remember, they compared the price of a t-shirt. Patagonia's t-shirt was $50. And so when we think about paying $50 for a t-shirt, and then George t-shirt is $10, and then Goodfellow and Company's t-shirt is $7, is there a true value difference in terms of quality and durability between the $10, the $7 t-shirt and the $50 t-shirt? And that's, that's in the eye of the beholder. So that's in the eye of the customer. Is it ultimately doing what you expect it to do from a performance standpoint? Another brand, Ben & Jerry's, operates using upper echelon theory. And Ben & Jerry's is known far and wide for focusing on social justice issue. These guys have been arrested numerous times over the years during protests. And so, the notion of outcomes from an organization reflects the values of top management. So that's what upper echelon theory is in a sentence. The outcomes reflect the values of the top management team. And so it's about choices they make, that's about the culture and ultimately performance levels. So my old company, UCrops, was closed on Sunday. And it was a company founded by a very religious Southern Baptist husband and wife who made the decision that they did not want their employees working on Sunday. They also made the decision not to sell beer or wine within the supermarket. So even though UCrops was known globally and they were the market leader here in Richmond, they were closed on Sunday and they did not carry beer or wine. Now, Sunday used to be the second busiest shopping day of the week. Now it's number one, believe it or not. So most people actually go out and buy their groceries on Sunday. I guess Saturdays for family, sports, and that sort of thing. So the UCrop family could have made the decision to open on Sunday and automatically generate another 10, 15% revenue increase, but they chose not to. They could put wine and beer in their stores and generate more revenue and more profit, but they made the decision not to do that. We know Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday. And so what it does, number one, is it's about a strategic choice that the family is making not to operate on Sunday. And number two, it's going to have an effect on your performance, your financial performance, by the fact that UCrops did not open on Sundays, didn't sell beer or wine, lowered the profitability of the business. The family said to themselves, we're already making enough money. We want to give our employees, associates, Sunday off to be with their family, to do family activities. If you want to go to church, great. If you don't, that's your choice. And Ben & Jerry's is making the same decision. Ben & Jerry's will make controversial strategic choices And if you don't like their choices, you can make the decision not to shop with them, as people made the decision not to shop with UCrops. It's called intentional loss of business. And intentional loss of business is a wild thing to consider. But in Ben and Jerry's case, by their focus on social justice, and in the case of Chick-fil-A, given the fact that they're closed on Sunday, and in some cases, their controversial definition of family as well. They've tried to back off, their position of that. Publix, is backing off. One of the Publix family member has financed what happened up in DC, January, early January. And the Publix has been really trying to back away from that family member that has no affiliation with the business, but they still had to deal with the public relations downfall on it. And they're doing a lot of advertising right now on TV, I think, that are trying to reach out to a very diverse community. So organization outcomes reflect the values of the top management team. So in the case of Yvon Chouinard, without question, he, his wife, and his two children believe in a mission to save the home planet and how they want to position the business. And then, of course, Ben and Jerry's as well. Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's are both B corporations. What's interesting about Ben and Jerry's is they're actually owned by Unilever. And when they did the acquisition, Unilever agreed to allow Ben and Jerry's to have its own independent board. And so very unusual move, but they've been able to do that. And Ben and Jerry's has been, navigating that challenge since they sold to Unilever years ago. Michael Porter has been talking for the past 10, 11, 12 years. Michael Porter is considered the father of corporate strategy. And so there's another video that I've put out there for you to review. And Michael Porter talks about this notion of corporate shared value. I'm going to talk about organizational values in a second. I want to make sure that you understand that shared value is a bit different than organizational values. There's some overlap, but for the most part, they're different concepts. Corporate shared value is where I, as a company, such as Patagonia, make the decision to focus on being a socially responsible company with the environment as our focus. And we're going to integrate that into how we operate our business. And so the notion of corporate shared value is a company in terms of the upper echelon theory will make the decision that we want to give back in some way. We want to help our community. We want to help a particular area of focus, whether it's the environment, whether it's social justice, whether it's poverty, whether it's homelessness, whatever that issue is, that a business can jump in and help with that while also driving growth for them. And so it's about a social need. It's about creating business opportunities. And it's about leveraging corporate assets and expertise. And ultimately, that's what's created and called shared value. So it's a really interesting concept. So in the case of Patagonia, it's demonstrating shared value. In the case of Patagonia, shared value. In the case of Tom Shoes, shared value. And so the notion of shared value and upper echelon theory are attached to the hip. And the notion of corporate shared values is really the manifestation of upper echelon theory in many respects. Now, earlier I talked about Jim Collins, and he loves to talk about this notion of a level 5 leader. And so when you go to work for a company, if you look all the way down level 1, what you want to be is highly capable contributor. And then you move into a team member. So you're not only doing your job, but you're contributing to a team. And then you move up into management. You become a competent manager. And then you even become a broader leader, where you're focused on the vision and mission to guide groups towards superior performance, a general manager or a CEO. But because you're just focused on the business doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a level 5 leader. Level 5 leader is you're building greatness through a combination of willpower and humility. And so when we think about great executives, I wouldn't say that Elon Musk is a level 5 leader. Elon Musk doesn't demonstrate a great deal of humility. He's an amazing person. He's a shaper of the future. Probably Tim Cook, Satya Nadella from Microsoft. I would say those two are better examples of Ross Brewer, of a level 5 leader than Elon Musk. Same with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was not humble at all, especially in his early years. As he came back later, I think he went through a personal transformation, and it's so sad that he died so young. That have been really interesting to see how Steve Jobs would have matured and ended up as a in terms of his legacy. So this statement, I'm not going to read it to you, other than the fact that it's really about understanding who your stakeholders are and looking at that last bullet point at the very bottom. What this group of CEOs, there was 110 CEOs who decided to really write about the purpose of the corporation. And this is about conscious capitalism. And what they said is the first bullet up there is about trying to create and deliver value for your customer. And then at the bottom, it's about generating long-term value for shareholders. This group of 110 a few years ago actually flipped it. The value to shareholders used to be number 1 on this list. So why do I bring this up? This goes back to upper echelon theory, where there are a number of corporations out there that are trying to do the right thing and are trying to be better corporate citizens. Let me talk about Walmart for a second. I hated Walmart. I hated them. Walmart would come into towns like Richmond. They were like Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan. They just would plow, mom and pops out of their way. They would force them into the communities, build their stores, and then if the stores didn't perform well, close them up and go somewhere else. Now, when you think about it, it was about creating long-term value for the shareholders. That's it. Lawsuit after lawsuit from employees about violating various Department of Labor regulations, squeezing every ounce of profit out of their suppliers. And in even many ways, guys, Walmart won't ever get accused of it, but they were the result of a lot of our manufacturing having to move overseas, because every year Walmart would force their suppliers to reduce 10%, their products by 10%. And the only way they could do that was to outsource. So Walmart has tried their best to turn over a new leaf. And so my hatred for Walmart has diminished over time. And I am replacing that with a degree of respect in terms of what they're trying to do. I think Walmart has a pretty substantial role in bringing society together of sorts, if they can pull it off, because the amount of customers that go through Walmart on any given day is just crazy. And if Walmart somehow could start to have a greater effect on our communities and the communities which they'd operate, it's a pretty cool thing. So I want to speak about strategic leadership on the other component of values. Remember, I talked about shared value. So now I want to talk about organization values. Shared values towards the external, organizational values are looking internal. These are my two bosses that I had for almost 18 years. And so when you think about building culture, and if you remember, one of those bullet points of the strategic leader is about creating an ethical, high-performing culture. You cannot do that without defining, articulating who you want to be. And so UCrop Supermarkets, when I was there, had over 6,000 associates. The youngest was 16 years old. The oldest was 87 years old. And UCrop's had over 50 associates over the age of 80. And they had an octogenarian club. So when you're driving an organization, you're trying to be successful, from a value standpoint, what's going to be your messages? What do you want your people to do? And so when we think about UCrops, they had 4 values. We had 4 values: be honest at all times, and 0 tolerance on that. I mean, even if you stole a slice of pizza and it was true, that you were terminated. No second chances when it came to honesty. Be safe. Everything you do, whether it's being safe from a security standpoint, being safe physically, being emotionally safe, be hardworking. Working in the supermarkets, you're on your feet all day, you're pulling boxes out, you're stocking, it's hard work. And then being helpful to customers when they came into the stores. So these 4 values drove our behavior every single day. And I, as the Chief Operating Officer, VP of Operations, my job was to be the best role model I could be. So I had to be honest, I had to be safe, I had to be hardworking, I had to be helpful. So great organizations tend to have very clear definition in terms of who they want to be. This may be the most significant slide for you to consider as you roll your way through our class and our time together. Pushner and Schmidt did a study years ago. They studied thousands of people. And they did a survey. And what they asked was, as an associate of this company, do you feel that what you believe in terms of your own values are in alignment, which is the red line, with the company, or are you out of alignment with the company? And so if you think about the values of UCrops, reflect: is being honest, be safe, be hardworking, be helpful. Is this who you are? Is this what drives you in terms of your behavior? And now you look at these and go, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But the reality is everybody really hardworking? What's your experience? As you've worked with other people and other students, or in your jobs, is everyone possess a very strong work ethic, or are people really helpful to one another? Will they go out of their way to be helpful? Right? So when you look at these, are these a reflection of who you are? That's the red line. And so are you something different than these? Would you rather not do physical work? Would you rather do cerebral work? Or are you very independent and your orientation is not to be helpful to other people, and you're going to be out of alignment? And what the research found was that if your value system were in alignment with the values of the organization, to a much greater extent, you're going to support goals. To a much greater extent, you're going to feel committed. To a much greater extent, you're going to feel successful. To a much greater extent, you're going to feel that management's credible. And then look what happens in terms of stress, and you're going to experience less stress. So essentially what this means is that when you go to work every day, you can be you. You don't have to pretend to be somebody else. You are you. And so this is significant. So you go to work for an organization that's aligned with your values, you're to a greater extent going to have less stress. And so versus just the opposite. If you got to be somebody you're not every day, you got to put on a game face that doesn't represent who you are. So I bring this up in this chapter. It's not so much strategy, but we'll talk about this notion of culture eats strategy for lunch, and values drive culture. Values drive culture. Now, if you have a culture of negativity, if you have a culture of dysfunction, if you have a culture of deceit, then then the organization, the strategic leaders can negatively destroy shareholder value. And so here are some examples of leaders who came into an organization and had a negative effect on shareholder value, perhaps because of arrogance, hubris, unethical behavior. And so we see every year organizations struggling their way through this. Elizabeth Holmes right now is under indictment at Theranos, and her trial is going on in California right now. So if you think about a strategic leader, I mean, you've got stakeholders that you're navigating. You have your external stakeholders, which are your customers and your suppliers and your alliance partners, creditors, unions, communities, governments, media, all these groups that you have to navigate. The more regulated the organization, meaning the more that the government tends to get involved in what you're doing, the greater the pressure is under external stakeholders. On the internal stakeholders, that's about your employees, it's about your stockholders, and that's about your board members. And so when you are a strategic leader, part of that job description that I talked about earlier is in terms of navigating all the issues around the anticipation and the envisioning and the empowerment, is navigating all of these very diverse constituencies for your organization. So when you think about stakeholder relationships, you can't think about it without thinking about strategy, which is an integrative approach to managing the diverse set of stakeholders. And you're ultimately trying to create competitive advantage. I'm again starting to talk more and more about competitive advantage, which is just a foundational component of strategy. And so we think about Uber and the brand called Uber, and Uber was founded out of the San Francisco area by a couple of co-founders, and they brought in huge amount of private equity, but they did a horrendous job navigating all their diverse stakeholders. They ticked off local government agencies. Even their competition hated them. They were using baseball bats to beat on Uber cars. You kind of get it, I mean, Uber came in as a disruptor, but they chose to have really sharp elbows in how they went to market. They had a terrible relationship with their employees. And as a result, their CEO founder was eventually fired. Huge amount of lawsuits. Uber had to pay huge attorney fees. And to this day, guys, they're still not profitable. Or I haven't seen their most recent quarterly report. I haven't listened to their earnings call, but they're moving more and more into Uber Eats. The ride sharing is still a big part of who they are as well. So when you do have a great strategy with your stakeholders are going to be more cooperative. You're going to lower your business transaction cost, right? So think about all the amount of money that Uber has spent on attorney's fees. One, to defend it against the internal harassment charges, millions, the payout of millions, as well as the amount of money for the attorneys on government relations. There's going to be greater adaptability and flexibility, more predictable returns, and then a stronger reputation. Uber certainly has great brand awareness, and they had in their early days great brand equity, but they've been struggling their way through this for a number of years. And they brought in when their founder left, they brought in the CEO for Expedia.com, and good man. He's tried to position the brand in a very positive way, but it's been a difficult road for them. Facebook, and I'm sure most of you have a Facebook account. I haven't used my Facebook account in 3 years, maybe. Love my Instagram account, but I don't even know how to turn Facebook off. I'm afraid to get back in there. but they've had their struggles, and so we may be addicted to Facebook, but we all have heard, what Facebook has done to polarize us as citizens of the United States. So when we think about stakeholder impact analysis, we have to go through a 5-step process. Who are our stakeholders that we have to understand? What are their interesting claims? What opportunities and threats do our stakeholders present? What are the legal, ethical, and philanthropic responsibilities do we have to our stakeholders? And what should we do to effectively address the stakeholder concerns? So this is the impact analysis that we're going to have. So whether you're Facebook, whether you're Uber, whether you're Apple, whether you're Amazon, whether you're a small brand located in a community, you have to consider your stakeholders as you start thinking about the future and where you want to go. I had said that leaders can have a negative effect on performance, and we've talked about Blockbuster. We've talked about the fact that the first move to DVD and then the subsequent release of Netflix as a brand and Redbox as a brand started nibbling at Blockbuster, and then streaming video. And as streaming video became effective, rendered Blockbuster, irrelevant. You just didn't need to go to Blockbuster if you had bandwidth, right? So really, even as streaming video came out, bandwidth issue still was an important consideration. And so how did Blockbuster miss that? We talked about cognitive dissonance, right? We talked about them getting into a paradigm. Well, what creates cognitive dissonance? What creates the inability for an organization to respond to what the external environment is throwing at it? What Jim Collins, Good to Great, Built to Last, Circuit City was one of his Built to Last companies. Was just loved the brand, headquartered here in Richmond, and you probably don't know that. And had 600 corporate employees, located 20 minutes from where I sit. And what he found is not only Blockbuster, but Circuit City, other great companies, what happens who are iconic. We see it happening right now with Kmart. And what he found is this notion of arrogance born of success, hubris. You get to a point where you're performing so well, people are wanting to talk about you, they're writing about you, and your feeling is that you can't be beaten, you can't be overcome, and so you get arrogant and you start not attending to your competitive advantage. You think your competitive advantage is going to last forever. It's like an athlete who just gets all sorts of awards, but then during the off season doesn't stay in shape, and when they come back to training camp, they're out of shape and then they get cut. Undisciplined pursuit of more. Growth is okay. Remember, having a growth mindset is okay. But remember that job description of a strategic leader, you got to build capabilities, you got to build infrastructure. And so just to say, if it was Walmart saying, we're going to build a milk plant, or we're going to go into the milk plant industry, but they don't build the infrastructure and the capabilities and the core competencies to do it, that's being undisciplined. And so you think about Apple right now. Apple's moved into streaming video, but Apple hasn't grown like crazy. And part of what they are, doing is they're going very thoughtfully to make sure they don't make any major errors. And that's kind of the Apple way. One of the brands that I'm wondering about that is following this undisciplined pursuit of more is Disney. And then one of their sub brands, ESPN. I used to love ESPN. And I've just watched ESPN operate over the past several years, and I almost feel that they have got arrogance right now. They know they dominated in the sports communications market, and I just feel like they are very undisciplined, and they're coming in like Uber with very sharp elbows. I've actually wanted to send the CEO of ESPN, Jim Collins' book, which is just this is a really short read, but it's a really good book, How the Mighty Fall. Then in you're in denial. Oh no, the grizzly bear is not going to get us. COVID's not going to get us. Then all of a sudden you are now sick. You're lying in the hospital bed. You did not get vaccinated. You're ready to be intubated, and you say, "Can I have the shot now?" Well, no, it's too late. So you're grasping for salvation. And I'll never forget when Blockbuster started putting in the 2 liters of Coke and the M&Ms and the Milk Duds and the microwave popcorn. That's a sign of grasping for salvation. And then the brand is no longer relevant. And so you come to that realization and you file for bankruptcy or liquidation. So leaders, can also take a brand down a rabbit hole in the wrong way. And unfortunately, Blockbuster, Circuit City, Enron, Theranos, they're all examples of brands that did that. So we go back then to our little definition, and Roz Brewer, who is working her way through Walgreens. We know the booster shots are coming out. How is Walgreens going to position themselves in the future? It's really interesting because Dollar General, in their quest for growth, has just made the decision that they're going to start to play a bigger role in health. Dollar General is located in a lot of rural areas that don't have great access to healthcare. And so Dollar General is going to position themselves in some way towards a greater focus on healthcare. I'm not sure what that's going to be. So facilitating the strategic direction, looking at the portfolio, focused on the culture, and as we said earlier, the high values, building infrastructure, create a balanced organization system is all really important. So when you start to say, how are we going to drive growth? All right, how are we going to be a strategic leader? There's 3 approaches or methodologies. One, strategic planning is a formal top-down. You gather your top 15 executives, you go out, you collect research, you collect data, you feed it back to them. That's a formal top-down approach. Scenario planning, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, and that is where you're looking at different scenarios, such as self-driving cars, right? So, or the electrification of automobiles. And then serendipity, and serendipity is when strategy falls into your lap. Serendipity is where you have to be just in a state of openness. It might not be on your strategic plan, but it still can. You must be in a state of openness if by chance you just run into an opportunity. Let me give an example of that. So Jim Ukrop was out at a function probably around 1985, 86, something like that. He met the CEO for Citi, the bank out of New York, and the CEO of the bank said, "Hey, we're looking for a regional supermarket operator. We have an idea for this card-based marketing program, and would you consider to be a kind of an alpha site for us of sorts?" An experimentation site. We had 40,000 customers in the Richmond area. And Jim said, "Well, I mean, how much is it going to cost?" And the guy said about 5 million. Jim said, "Well, we don't have that kind of money. This wasn't in our strategic plan. We hadn't planned for it." And that CEO for Citi said, "We'll take care of the cost." So I think there was another supermarket out on the West Coast that they did it with as well. But they came in with the technology team, and we created this little value customer card here. And Ucrops became the first in the world to have a value customer card. And now Wegmans has got it, Kroger has got it, Food Lion has got it, drugstores have them. I mean, they're everywhere. This was started in 1986, 1987. And this, in many respects, guys, was the start data analytics for those of you who are really interested in that, because you had all this data, this consumer shopping data, and now what are you going to do with it? And we were very relationship driven. We did not have a data analytics program, at BCU. The only one that we could find was at Michigan State University. And we hired a guy named Jeff Thomas who had gotten his PhD in it, brought him to Richmond. He spent 2 years with us putting together a plan. And then just as we were ready to implement it, SAS Institute hired him away from us. So we were able to never build a competency, a capability at data management. And in many respects, that was my fault because I was in charge of the culture. I was in charge of capability development. We did some pretty good stuff with it, and we were the first mover with it. But then once Kroger got its paws on it, boy, they just went crazy with it. Target went crazy with it. And these bigger companies did a much better job than we ever did. But the whole idea started purely by serendipity, falls into your lap. And so even though we want to have a plan right up at the top here, sometimes stuff's going to fall into your lap and you need to be in a state of openness for it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about strategic planning. And strategic planning it's a what if scenario. So if you think about what we know coming down the chute, we know General Motors has said they're going to be fully electric by 2035. Mary Barra has made this really big statement about electric cars, and a number of her competitors have done the same. That's 14 years from now. Okay, so many of you are going to be in your mid to late 30s, early 30s. And so the world, most of the world, is going to be operating with electric cars. So you start thinking about what's the ramification of that? How are we going to make that happen? What's the ramification of convenience store operators? What are they going to do? Right? You run it. What's Wawa going to do 14 years from now if the great majority of the cars popping in are electric? Well, recharging. Well, recharging stations take time and they're incredibly expensive at this point. So we have established this long-term vision, but a lot has to happen. A lot has to unfold to bring that to reality. So you have apartment complexes, you have home builders, you have commercial development people, you have supermarkets. And then who's going to be installing all of these? What's the role of Dominion Power, our local, regional power operator, going to be that? So brands have to do these what ifs, and you have to ask, what is the implication if this were to happen? What's the implication if COVID never goes away? And more than likely, it ain't going to go away for a long time. And so either you get it and you develop a immunity to it, you build antibodies, or you get, a vaccination. And so what we know is almost 80% of our population has to have antibodies for it to slow down. But what we know, there's breakthrough cases. We know that you can get it and then you can get it repeatedly. So this little thing could stay around unless we develop herd immunity collectively, either through everybody getting it or majority of people getting it or vaccinated. It's never going to go away. What's life going to be like going forward? So does that mean every year we get a flu shot? And the flu shot, it not only has the flu shot, but it has the COVID shot as well. And what they're already saying is you can get the two shots at the same time. And so this is a big issue for the fall for Roz Brewer, for CVS, for Rite Aid, anybody for Wegmans, anybody who's got pharmacies in the stores administers shots. How are we going to manage that? How are we going to deal with that? Those are what if scenarios. Tariffs, or a big issue. So this involves new laws, $15 an hour minimum wage. What's the implication of that going forward? Demographic shifts. We know that the Harley customer was the male baby boomer. He is now aging. or dying or going into assisted living, how do they navigate that? How do they really connect with the millennial male or female customer? Economic conditions, technological advances, what's in the case of Blockbuster and streaming video, what's the next equivalent technology that's going to be out there? 5G, of course. So all these issues are under constant examination for companies, and that's the anticipation, and then how you're going to react to it. And so, you start thinking about identifying multiple future scenarios. Again, whether it's life with COVID forever, or at least the next 10 years, it's, what if more tariffs come in? What are some new pieces of legislation come in? So you want to develop strategy plans to address the different scenarios, and then you create strategic options, or you go right to the execute the dominant strategic plan. And then you get feedback, you monitor performance, or you discard if the plan's not necessary. So you create a scenario around it, but it's it's not necessary. So when things are really clear, companies hate scenario planning because you're never quite sure if it's going to come about. When we think about COVID-19, we heard about it. I heard about it every week. One of my MBA students worked at Foxconn here in the Richmond area. They're making cartridges for Hewlett Packard. So I got a blow by blow every week in my MBA class in the winter and spring of 2020. And yet, even though I was hearing it, it's still far away. It's still far away. And so in January and February of 2020, the majority of us were hearing about it, and it was like it was like a wildfire. It's still way over there. Not sure if I really need to get ready for it. Next thing you know, the wind's change and it's screaming towards you. So when you're a CEO, when you're a strategic leader, these potential scenarios are always in the works, and you always have to be thinking about them when you go forward. Now, when you think about your big ideas, when you think about your bets, right? There's two issues around what we call strategic initiatives I want you to really think about. One is autonomous actions. This is essentially where you are clear about your brand, you're clear about what your strategy is, but then there's going to be an emergent strategy that'll be undertaken by employees in response to unexpected situation or opportunities. So back in 1991, 92, we knew that Walmart was going to come to Richmond, and we had to get ready for them. And so one of the things we decided to do was borrow $100 million to upgrade and build new stores. That's a lot of money to borrow. And so I had to find $4 million a year in operating expenses just to cover our interest expense. So I went to Seattle, and I talked to a company called QFC, Quality Food Centers. And that company really was doing a great job of productivity, and I learned a lot, and shrink, dealing with shrink stuff in supermarkets. So I went for one reason, but I ended up coming out with probably one of the best ideas that we had implemented in a while, and that was sushi, And so I brought sushi back, the idea of sushi, and my bosses thought about it. We all thought about it, and not sure if Richmond is ready for sushi. Told the buddy up in Philly, he implemented it really quickly and did extremely well. And then we said, let's do it. So we put in the sushi bars that we've already talked about. That's an autonomous action. I didn't go out. I wasn't on an assignment to look for sushi, but it happened. So a little bit of serendipity too, if you ask, if you really think about it. And it happened for Starbucks with a number of their drinks as well. The other piece is you're very, very clear about what you're trying to do. In the case of Chick-fil-A, fast and friendly, great tasting, consistent food, family atmosphere, fast and friendly. So how, when you're trying to drive more revenue, or what we call velocity through a unit, how can you allocate your resources to do that? And that really shapes what we call realized strategy. And so when you go into Chick-fil-A and you look at their drive-throughs, and there's single drive-throughs, double drive-throughs, triple drive-throughs, my Chick-fil-A 5 minutes from here has a triple drive-through. And what do they spend on it? $100,000 to build a canopy, and to purchase the little tablets there you see the associates using. So if you decide to move and to make a bet into a strategy, and in the case of Chick-fil-A, one of their brand promises is fast and friendly. And what they wanted to try to do is create more velocity through their stores. Let's see if we can get better at drive-through, which will be aligned. That'll be an on-brand situation. And so you're going to budget hard, which are the capital expense that can be depreciated. And then the soft are the people expense. It's the operating, and that goes into your operating budget. So for those of you who are not accounting majors, when companies budget every year, they have their capital budget, which is we're going to build a new store, or we're going to buy new hardware, new computers, or anything that can be depreciated of sorts. And we allocate money to do that. And then you have your operating budget, which are your supply costs, your people costs, your advertising costs, those sorts of things. So this is a great example of resource allocation, where you think through, you got your strategy, and now you're trying to implement your strategy, and ultimately, what are we going to do to be successful with that? And so we think about going forward. We think about strategic leadership, and I want to go back to remember that top definition, the anticipation. So you're anticipating what's going on in the external. And so module 3 is going to be about doing an external assessment. You're going to be focused on what's happening in the external world that can have a positive and or negative effect on you. So look at the bottom two there. You're examining, preparing for potential threats that may capsize your brand, or you're going to seize on opportunities that are emerging. Is tragic as COVID has been, it has been an opportunity for some brands. And it certainly has been a threat for some brands. And then in module 4, we'll talk about the internal, which is around strengths and around weaknesses. So, so this is module 2, my strategic students, and hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you for module 3. Okay, you all have a great one. Bye-bye.